Hi, you're listening to the Professional Speaks podcast with me, Craig McKellar, your host. As an ex-Big Four auditor for 6 years, I now run a specialist recruitment consultancy called McKellar Consulting. Throughout this podcast, I speak to senior leaders from the professional services community, past, present and future. These leaders work in accounting and finance, audit, tax, corporate finance, consulting, legal and investments. In the comfort of their own office, I will be posing questions to our guests to gain insights from them across a variety of topics, including balancing work and life, mental health and mindset, risk-taking, and effective leadership. These insights will help us learn, be inspired, grow, and ultimately succeed in what we want to achieve in our careers. Here's what's coming up on today's episode.
Through growing, we've managed to really get some fantastic talent into the team, with diversity of thinking, whether and also diversity is, whether that's sexuality, ethnicity, religion, whatever it may be. I think it's really important to build all that, to challenge that sort of unconscious bias that can sometimes get established and embedded into teams after a while as well. So, and balancing the internal promotions with external hires and making sure that that balance is thing. It's not always internal only. You're bringing in some external perspectives at the right time, and then trying to build succession ladders through the business so that people can feel that they can journey through the business. That there is it's not just a job. There is a career there, and then it's about looking for people with the right attitude and aptitude.
In this episode, I'm joined by Jamie Grant, who is Head of Corporate Banking and Managing Director for Scotland at Barclays Bank. Topics discussed include Jamie's journey of growing Barclays' presence in Scotland in a competitive market, advice for successfully gaining clients and building teams, and a bit more on his first non-executive director role for the 2026 Commonwealth Games. Jamie, thanks so much for coming on to the podcast. For those that don't know you, so listeners and viewers of this podcast, you're currently Managing Director and Head of Corporate Banking for Scotland at Barclays Bank here in Glasgow, and also Non-Executive Director for the upcoming Glasgow 2026 Commonwealth Games.
That's right, and delighted to be here. Thank you for taking the time.
No, that's great, and thank you for this lovely room on the Clyde, and a lovely, I was going to say summer's day. It's like a summer's day, but we're currently in April. But no, it's great to have you here. With all guests, I like to just understand a bit more about you in terms of your background, upbringing. Can you tell us a bit about that in terms of who you are?
I suppose it depends how far back you want me to go. But so I grew up on a farm up in Lossiemouth, up in the Morayshire coast. Dad was a farmer, and Mum was a teacher. And so I suppose my childhood was up there and enjoying life on the farm. Although I wasn't a very good farmer, as Dad sort of told me. And then he sort of said, the farm's always here. If you want to go off and stretch your wings and do something different, then do so. So I decided to take a slightly different path than he did. But we still have the family farm up there, and I go back occasionally. It's lovely to get back and remember your roots. But yeah, that's probably where it all started way back in the day.
So obviously your dad was effectively like a business owner, wasn't he? I guess having the farm himself.
Yeah, just a sort of small, medium-sized farm. But the farm wasn't big enough for me and my brother. I think that was the realisation. It was about 400 acres. It wouldn't have been enough to support two families, if you split it in half. So, that's why we were encouraged to go off and do slightly different things. And, as I say, it was always there if we wanted to come back to it. I was probably better at the animals, and my brother was better at the machinery. I think I wrote a tractor off when I was age 12, so that was the end of my farming career. And then Dad never let me forget that, actually. So, we just took slightly different paths and never really did go back to the farm, although sometimes when you're sitting in front of a computer and the weather's miserable, you think, maybe farming life is quite good.
Yeah, and on a day like this when the sun's shining.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
So I mentioned you're currently Head of Corporate Banking for Scotland at Barclays. Could you maybe just give us, I guess, a flavour or a summary of your career to date as well?
So yes, I suppose after I got encouraged to go and do something else, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I went to school and then obviously got grades that allowed me to take a little bit of time. I took a year out and went to Australia for a year and taught cricket in Melbourne for a year just as a gap student. So that gave me some thinking time. And then I came back to University of St Andrews. So studied geography at university, and I suppose one of the things I say to lots of students when they're asking me about what to do through university is just do what you enjoy. Don't, unless you're obviously going to be a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer, just do something that you're going to enjoy and be good at. So I chose geography, went all the way through university again, not really knowing what I wanted to do ultimately. Saw lots of friends starting to go on in those days it was called the milk rounds, talk about accountancy, and it seemed to be something that people were doing and signing up for in their sort of third year internships. And I was lucky enough at that point to meet a partner, Ernst in Glasgow, and they didn't have any intern jobs, but they did have a job in the post room. So I worked for the summer in the post room at Ernst & Young, and that was probably the best job you could possibly have as a student, because in those days you used to push the trolley around all the floors, and you met all the partners and the partner secretaries, and you really became integrated into the business. And then through that, I was just very lucky, and I think someone had dropped out of the graduate training programme, and the senior partner at the time asked me if I wanted to follow accountancy as a career path. So that was the decision I made then, was to join EY back in the day, and it was in Glasgow in George House, and that was the path to accountancy, I suppose.
Just on the post room, so for those of us that are trying to imagine this.
It's not like an inbox.
Yeah, I guess tell us a bit more about that. Like, how did that help you connect with maybe the partners, the senior people within the business?
Well, it literally was as simple as delivering the mail at 11 o'clock and 3 o'clock.
To the desks.
To the desks, yeah. And you just got to speak to people. And I think, I'd always, and I suppose Dad and Mum would always encourage us to integrate and network with adults, and, so it was just, and show an interest in people and just show an interest in what people did. And I think I used that summer just to be curious, just to sort of, what is accountancy? What do you do? All these people sitting in desks was probably alien, to, someone in a third year at university, has probably just seen the library and a few bars.
Yeah.
So, it was a sort of first introduction to a real office environment. So I was just curious, and I think that's what led to them obviously offering me a sort of traineeship there. But yeah, starting with going from geography into accountancy was a massive step. I didn't know what a fixed asset was the day I started. And then so it was a real learning curve after that.
And so into audit, was that right? The programme is doing audit?
Yeah, so the way it works in accountancy in those days was you did sort of 3 years traineeship. Some of the time you're in the office based, learning the practical, the theory of things. Then other times we were at a place called Rowan House out in Glasgow, Polly Shields I think it is, doing the sort of more actual training. It's a bit like being at university again. And then you sort of balance that for the 3 years. You get a bit of work experience. You obviously pass your exams, hopefully, which thankfully I did. And then and then after your 3 year traineeship, I suppose you can choose other parts of the business or a different career path. And I suppose I used Ernst & Young as a bit of a catalyst to sort of spread my wings a little bit further after that.
Mm-hmm. And so you went abroad. Is that right? When you went overseas? Did you stay in audit as well? Yeah,
well, for a bit. So I suppose the thought process at that point was very much what I want to do next. And there's a sort of a lot of people were just handing in their notices as soon as they qualify and go off to do jobs. It was sort of seen as the macho thing to do, or it seemed to be everyone was doing it. But I didn't really ever see someone, as all the businesses that we audited, I never really saw a role that I thought that's for me. Partly because when you turn up to do an audit, the first thing that people asked you is how long are you going to be here for? Yeah. And it was seen as a regulatory requirement. And I really just didn't feel I was adding a huge amount of value to the businesses that I was coming in contact with. I was there because there was a need for us to do the year-end audit. So I never saw a job that I really wanted to do. So I sort of discounted what I didn't want to do, but I hadn't really worked out what I wanted to do. So I used Ernst & Young as a little bit to give me a bit of space, and an opportunity came along with EY to go abroad. So I was keen on sport. I'd obviously been to Australia for a year, and I thought, well, why not Africa? I'd studied Southern Africa as part of my geography degree, so I was quite interested in the whole sort of post-apartheid Africa and how that was evolving and developing. The chance to go and play some rugby and cricket in a beautiful environment, and to go there with a company that was familiar as well, which was good, because I arrived in Africa not knowing anyone. But Ernst & Young was great, and then, as you say, I started in audit, and then moved more into sort of business risk consulting and sort of management consulting over my period there. But I was probably there meant to be for a year, but ended up staying for about 3 years.
Would you say, although you knew long term you didn't want to do audit, you also said you didn't see any roles like in the companies you were auditing you wanted to do? Do you think there's something to say in that what professional services podcast, professional services gives you is like, there's a lot of things you liked about working professional services that you thought I might not get in a company at that moment in time. So I'm talking about maybe variety, people.
Oh, amazing.
Else,
yeah. Don't get me wrong, while I discounted accountancy wasn't going to be my long-term career path, what I had done was give me, a huge breadth of business experience from different types of businesses that I had audited, to different people I'd met, a network across the whole of Scotland, and you got to learn how businesses worked. And again, I suppose I treated it a bit like a postgraduate degree, whereas, having done geography, it was like, well, am I going to be a PE teacher or a geography teacher? It was that's where I was sort of my psyche was in first year at university. But I gradually got interested in business, and I think audit just gives you such a great grounding, both technically, but also just in terms of how businesses operate. But then that's why I suppose when I went to Ernst & Young in Cape Town, I decided I want to move quite quickly into the risk consulting, management consulting, because I wanted to be that person that was in providing business advice, strategic advice, in the sort of C-suite with the C-suite talking about, where the strategy was going. So that was a great, learning curve again for another 3 years.
And then after EY, you went kind of into banking, left, practice, professional services, and went into financial services, doing banking, working with SME businesses. Is that right?
Yeah, so I suppose the 3 years came to an end, and I suppose I was starting to make a decision: do I stay here permanently and build a life in South Africa, or do I return to the UK? And I suppose my parents and missing family and things like that start to come to the fore, and it was you could say it was a very selfish lifestyle living in Africa, enjoying yourself and everything that Africa had to provide. But, my parents weren't getting any younger. I was away from my brother, and so, I felt it was probably time to come home. And I was also earning rand, which in those days wasn't worth an awful lot. And you could see friends that you had trained with at other audit firms in Scotland starting to move up the ladder. I probably thought, well, it's time to get back and start to build my roots where I wanted to stay, long term. I came back and I reached out to lots of friends who I'd known and met, back to the network point of view in terms of what accountancy provided was, I knew a lot of people that were already into the banks and all that, and they were having a great time doing really interesting deals, and I thought, really keen to do that. So contacted a few of them, managed to get an interview, and then I really had to start at the bottom again. So joined Bank of Scotland, early 2000s, in their structured finance team as a manager, and learned a huge amount from the team that I was in and around, and it was a really nice time. There was lots happening in that market. There was lots of transactions happening. Private equity was quite aggressive across the UK, so getting involved in lots of small but also quite large transactions right through the piece, but learned a lot again from the people I worked with about how do you structure deals, how do you consider lending safety, lending viability, how do you really sort of decide what's appropriate level of leverage for companies. So again, and people wanted to speak to you because they wanted leverage, they wanted debt, they wanted a banking relationship. So got, again, using the skills you had gathered to date to put into into practice, and we were doing lots of deals both in Scotland but south of the border in London, and yeah, it was a really interesting time, a really fast growing business at the time, so it was great.
Yeah, and so you progressed there. You were there for a number of years, and then you decided to join Barclays Bank. And tell us a little more about that opportunity, because my understanding is that at that time Barclays Bank didn't really have much of a presence in Scotland, and certainly nothing like it does now. We're sitting here, Barclays campus, you think you said earlier, 4,000 or 5,000 desks, 7,000 people. What was it like back then?
Yes, yeah. If you had told me it was going to be this size then, I probably wouldn't have believed you. But it was really just a sort of chance meeting with a good friend, and who I consider a good friend, a colleague, a mentor, a chap called Ali Scott, who was at RBS at the time, and he had taken an opportunity to go and join Barclays to really set up their leverage finance team and take it out to the regions. I think Barclays was very strong south of the border, and there was a desire to try and grow the business more regionally, and Ali took that opportunity from RBS, and then we just met. I think it was in the pub one day actually, and he just said, like, rather than competing with each other, why don't we come together, and do you fancy coming to Barclays and setting up a team? And that was fabulous. That was just a breath of fresh air that I needed. It was something new. It was a real challenge. It was quite entrepreneurial. We started off in a small room in Melville Crescent in Edinburgh, and there was about 6 of us. It was dial-up network, and we just had to reach out to all the relationships we had built over the years, and went on a path of doing deals, and the market was kind to us as well. So we had a really good start, and I suppose the idea for Barclays was try and build the franchise north of the border, and thankfully we managed to do that to what it is today. So.
Did it help going into that role? Obviously it was a bit risky, it sounds like, but you were obviously confident enough to give it a go, and you needed a breath of fresh air to do something new. Did it help the fact that there's a few others bought in to doing it, and you knew Ali, so again, there's a familiarity there with working with somebody. Would you say that's all true? Yeah,
it was a massive opportunity, and I think it was de-risked by the brand. Barclays is a massive brand across the UK, so it was de-risked to that point of view. And also knowing Ali and his credentials, and that it was to align myself alongside him, and we had 15 or so years working together. It was fabulous. So that was. So was it a risk? You could say it was, but I think the brand de-risked it, and there was a real confidence from Barclays and that what they wanted to achieve in Scotland, and there was a lot of confidence they instilled in myself and Ali and the team to do that. So. It probably didn't feel like a risk at the time. It just felt like an opportunity that you couldn't say no to. And also, Bank of Scotland was going through a bit of change at that point as well. You had the Halifax had just come into the group. Things were changing within there, and it was probably the right time for me to go and try and stretch my legs and do something a little bit different. But so I probably saw it more as an opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, I understand what you're saying about the brand name.
Yeah.
But I do think you'll see in your role, personal brand is a lot to do with success as well. You could say, I'm with this company, but you might not have a great network or great relationships, but you obviously also had that element from all the years that you were working, whether it was at EY or Bank of Scotland, that you thought, I know these people though. I'm quietly confident no one to work with me. Would you say an aspect of that?
Yeah, there was a bit of, I enjoy meeting people, and I enjoy, the networking and the socialising and the building a sort of personal rapport with someone is the bit that I enjoy about the business. If I was being really self-critical, the technical, but I wasn't a very good accountant. I got through, but it wasn't my core competency. I would say my core competency was how I got on with people and trying to instill that culture within people I work with as well, and the culture that I like to operate around. And Ali was someone who massively respected in the market, and it was just a bit of fun. I think you've got to enjoy what you do. It's a bit of advice I give to colleagues. I said, if you wake up in the morning, and you put your feet on the floor, and you've got to take a deep breath before you go to work, you're probably not in the right job. You've probably got to think about what you're doing. And I just was totally enthused by it, and was quite energised by the new opportunity and the chance to be quite entrepreneurial within a big brand was quite nice, actually.
For people listening that are being part of, let's say, a new brand growing or a new product or new service offering, you know, kind of, they might be interested to hear how, okay, you've got a, you know, decent enough brand, you've got the connections, but how do you really, in a competitive marketplace, you know, kind of successfully get clients to work with you rather than maybe work with others who they might have also good relationships with, you know?
Yeah, I suppose attitude and aptitude is probably the sort of first and foremost, I think, would be what I would say to the young people coming through the industry. Be curious, you know, try and build that sort of personal relationship, because you could argue that banking at times is a bit of a commodity. And so how do you differentiate yourself from someone who's, you know, got an equally good brand above the door, you know, with a track record in lending and all that. So you've got to try and build some personal, because I do believe that people want to work with people they get on with. Yeah. It's not always about quantum and price in the banking sector, and you want to have a relationship that someone will feel that you've got their back, you're there to help, you're genuinely invested in their business, and you're there to support, not just in the good times, but also when things get a little bit tough as well.
And, you know, building rapport, getting close to people genuinely, kind of knowing them genuinely, you know, would you say those are the kind of ingredients for success? You know, have you had to think, right, this is a real challenge here, I need to be quite creative in how I, you know, get this person on board?
Yeah, I think sometimes you've got to be creative. Sometimes you've got to be self-aware as well in terms of where your skill sets are and where others can complement. You know, so again, you know, making sure you've got the right team on the pitch when you're pitching for clients, and whether that's, you know, similar interests or, you know, diversity of thinking, or, you know, I think it's really important. You know, and again, it's just trying to. I always do a lot of research before I meet people, in terms of not just what their business is, but what a bit about them as individuals. So you can just try and make that initial, you know, connection in the first 5 minutes of walking into a room. You know, who do they know that you might know? You know, just trying to find out just anything. You know, what football team do they support? Yeah. Just small things. It sounds very basic, but just trying to find something you can connect on. I think early, I think just relaxes the meeting, gets the heart rate a bit lower, and then, you know, hopefully there's good rapport through that. Obviously, you've got to have the technical capability to back it up, and you've got to be able to deliver. And, you know, sometimes you've got to put yourself out there to deliver, and then make sure you do from a personal perspective as well.
And people on this podcast have, you know, mentioned about being authentic, you know, and you know, be who you are out of work, in work, and transparent with individuals. You know, would you say that's definitely kind of what you would be doing as well? Yeah,
I don't think I change between work and non-work and sort of friendship groups. Yeah, just be authentic. I think, you know, listen, I think, is a key thing. I think, you know, sometimes, you know, you go into meetings, you know, make sure you're listening to what's important to them. Sometimes I think we're sort of going to meetings and it's like, you know, you've got to sell a product, or you've got to, it's not about that. It's about listening to what the client wants and trying to sort of understand what their ambition is, and maybe what the barriers to them achieving that ambition is, and then how can you help that. So it's trying to be listen and solution led, rather than we've got all these products, which one do you want? That's a horrible experience for anyone. You know what it's like if someone's trying to sell something to you. So I sort of try and take myself away from that and be much more just listening. And sometimes you come out of meetings and there's nothing further you can do with the client. That's fine. You know, doesn't always have to be a sort of a sales environment, so to speak. And always ask the client what's important to them.
On the listening, you know, I think early on in my career I learned that listening is not just being quiet, because what some people can do is they're thinking, right, well, I'm going to say this next. They're just waiting for you to stop talking so I can say what I'm saying I want to say, and they haven't listened to what you're saying. So, you know, it's a good point. You know, listening is actually listening, and like you're saying, listen to what the person's saying, and you know what to say next.
It's hearing, it's listening and hearing, and, you know, I suppose active listening. Yeah. Which, you know, I can sometimes be criticised, I suppose, for not doing it at times. I'm sure my family would say that I don't always listen. But, no, I think that's important. It's, you know, I think if you go into a meeting with someone, they've got to leave that meeting thinking that was worthwhile use of my time.
Uh-huh.
You know, if they don't leave the meeting with what was that all about, you know, that's never a great place. So I think you've always got to try and think about, you know, what the experience is for the person on the other side of the table rather than just what you're trying to convey.
Yeah, no, it's important. I mean, you know, people, whether they're 15 years into their career or university, listen to this podcast. And I think, you know, recently I saw a Forbes report on Gen Z, so 18 to 25-year-olds, losing these soft skills, you know, of listening, for example. A variety of things, you know, COVID will have part to play, but it's also other impact in reasons. So it is something that needs to be talked about. I also saw last week or the week before about some company training their graduates to how to talk on the phone.
Right.
You know, it's and you kind of just laugh at it, and you know that's how ridiculous. But I think the world, obviously, we've been on our phones, on our laptops so much that maybe some of those skills do need actually taught. And if you are speaking to be more experienced people, then you know you need to be on the same page.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, and I think that's what I'm fascinated by now. I suppose later in the career is that sort of culture that can be created across an organisation with people at very different stages in their career, but bringing very different strengths to the party. And you know, some of the Gen Zs and the younger sort of generation are fabulous at things that, you know, that I wouldn't be that strong at, and you know, I can learn a hell of a lot from them. It's fascinating, but it's important as well just to build a business with that diversity. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and on that, I'd like to kind of come on to you've built teams before, people, successful teams, high performing teams. You know, how do you go about hiring when you do that? You know, and if you want diversity in the team, and you're thinking of all the different facets of how somebody can contribute to the team being high performance and fitting into the culture of the business, but bringing diversity in lots of ways. You know, how do you go about that, and has it changed over years? You know,
it probably has changed over the years, and I suppose the team's grown in size over the years, so it's had to change. But you know, I think for me it's building that broad base, you know, and trying to make sure that, you know, I suppose there's a couple of things. One is you know, getting the people that, you know, what I call culture carriers. You know, you want them in the business that can carry on the culture. I think I'm very lucky that we've got a really great team. I've been able to handpick it over the years with others, not just myself, but you know, through growing, we've managed to really get some fantastic talent into the team. With diversity of thinking, you know, whether and also diversity is, you know, whether that's sexuality, ethnicity, religion, whatever it may be. You know, I think it's really important to build all that, to challenge that sort of unconscious bias that can sometimes get established and embedded into teams after a while as well. So, you know, and balancing the internal promotions with external hires, and making sure that, you know, that balance is thing. It's not always internal only. You bringing in some external perspectives at the right time, and then trying to build succession ladders through the business so that people can feel that they can journey through the business. That there is really, it's not just a job, there is a career there. And then it's about looking for people with the right attitude and aptitude. We can all teach them the technical stuff, and we don't expect people to come in and be expert bankers on day one, you know. But if they come with the right attitude, they want to join. And listen, you're going to work with these people sort of, and colleagues, you know, 7-8 hours a day, 300 days a year, you know, excluding holidays and weekends. You know, you're going to spend a lot of time with, so you've got to make sure that, you know, you enjoy it and have fun as well. I think, you know, sometimes, and that's what I remember when I really started out in banking in the early 2000s. There was a lot of fun, you know. The markets were strong, everything was great. There was a lot of fun had. We worked hard, we play hard. And I'm not suggesting we need to be back in those days, but you do need time to decompress, to recompress, and to sort of think about, you know, keeping fresh. And you know, people are working hard. People get asked to do more with less. But you need that time to decompress. It's really important from a well-being perspective, from a health, from a resilience perspective, that you allow people to have a bit of fun as well. You know, you spend most of your life at work, so you've got to enjoy it.
That's true. I mean, I see, you know, firms that are growing fast, or they're firms that retain their talent, or people who get that balance, firms that get that balance right, you know, in terms of having fun and, you know, working hard, playing hard type of thing, and giving their employees space to decompress, an opportunity
Yeah.
to decompress. And I think it's good that firms are asking people to come back into the office as well. I don't mean necessarily full time, but even a little bit, just to, because we all need
Yeah.
to be with people as well and talk about things and learn things and celebrate as well. So the odd opportunity to go and get lunch with a colleague, as well as go and play darts or whatever on a Friday. It's all very much needed, isn't it?
No, it's important to, as I say, important to enjoy it. It's important to get to know your colleagues on a personal level as well. I think it's really important. If you're going to be working with someone, as I say, for the extent that you do, you've got to enjoy the environment you work in. And we're very lucky at Barclays here. We've got an amazing campus with gyms and restaurants and opportunities to decompress is here. So, it's encouraging staff to use the space and to take the time. And I think flexible working has worked really well. Allow people to have that sort of space as and when they need it. We are in a front-facing role within the organisation, so we do need people in the office and collaborating and talking about what's happening in the market and who they're seeing, and so those things are really, really important especially for the youngsters to learn and the people coming up through the business. But I'm sensing the further we move away from COVID, the easier that is becoming, and I think people are genuinely wanting to be around people. And it's nice, it's good.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I mentioned at the start that you're also non-executive director for the Commonwealth Games next year in Glasgow. Can you just say a bit more about, so what is your role in that?
So yes, I'm just as a non-exec director on the board there, and I was just really excited to be part of the Commonwealth Games experience in Glasgow. I missed out on the 2014 Games. I must have been on holiday or something. I didn't get to experience, but I can still hear people talking about it today. And yes, we're going to be delivering a very different Games, but in the same way, we'll deliver an excellent excellent programme of events. One of the biggest para sports programmes we've had. All within a very small 8-mile radius across Glasgow in 4 venues. So I'm really excited by what we're going to deliver for Glasgow, and hopefully the people of Glasgow can be proud, and indeed the people of Scotland can be proud, and hopefully we win some medals as well. That would be quite nice. So I'm really helping a lot on the sort of business engagement side of things. So making sure that the Games is connected to the business community from a sort of awareness perspective, from a commercial opportunities perspective. And then really the hope is that as well you're going to have 74 countries coming into Glasgow. There's a real chance for trade and for businesses to connect and those type of things. So I really hope that the sort of Scottish Government and Scottish Enterprise and other sort of bodies really take advantage of that opportunity, because it's not often you get those sorts of delegations coming into an area. We obviously had it with COP and other things. So I think the Games provides a really good platform to do that again. So I'm really excited. It's a lot to do in a short period of time, but that was also attractive because it was and it was something totally new for me. It was an events type organisation which I'd not really been involved in before, but just a fantastic executive we have across the business there, and also the non-execs, and a lot of them have done games to games, so and I'm learning a hell of a lot from them, which is fabulous. So yeah, it's really exciting for Glasgow. It's exciting for me to be involved in, and hopefully I will get a ticket and be able to go and see a games after all.
You will, I'm sure you will. And for any senior leader thinking of doing their first NED role, non-executive director role, what advice would you give them? And I know you've got your own story about doing this role.
Yeah, so I think do something you're really interested in. Make sure it's a topic or it's something that you're passionate about. And you've probably heard from what I've said today. Sport's always been a thread that I enjoy. So I think do something you're involved in. Be curious. Make sure people know you're available as well. I think I'm obviously looking at sort of how do I broaden my skill set? How can I add value? Back to the point of why did I get involved in the Glasgow? I felt had something to offer. But then you've also got to make yourself available and put yourself out there to try and get these roles. So, it's my first role. I've had 2 or 3 board meetings, so I'm still learning, and it's really just trying to get that balance between being an executive, which I have been for like 20 years, to now being a non-executive. It's a very different role. So it's that balance. And at the same time, not putting too much governance on the executive team, because they've got less than 500 days to deliver this games now. So it's just trying to get the balance right. I'm trying to be a good steward of the games, making sure that we look after the pounds and the pence properly. But ultimately, we deliver a fantastic experience for Glasgow.
Yeah. What's one of the differences maybe that you've come to learn from non-exec,
Maybe, it is that non-exec, it is that total change from being able to do the decisions, make the changes, to more ask the questions and listen to the answers. It's sometimes you've got to sit back, you've got to reflect, you've got to be more curious. You don't always have to come to the solution yourself. You let the executive come to the solutions, and trust and empowerment as well. Although that's really important in both sides. I think good leaders, whether that's on the executive or on the non-exec, it's about giving the people space, giving them the chance to flourish, but have their back if things go wrong. So if something happens, they know you're there for them, but not. It's really the difference between leadership and management. Try and be a leader, and I suppose you have to do that in a non-exec role in a slightly different way. But just be curious, make sure we're on the right path. But again, and also learn from people. There's some amazing people around the board table of which I'm learning a massive amount. So even at my stage of my career, you can continue to learn. So it's great.
No, great. Well, no, I really appreciate all of that. And just as we come to the end, I always like to ask people about the next 12 months. I mean, I've got an idea of what one of your goals will be, but thinking of the next 12 months, do you have any professional or personal goals? I suppose on a sort of Barclays level is just to continue to grow the business. We've been hugely successful over the last 20 years, and just seeing that incremental growth, with the investment we've had in the campus here, 400 million spend. We've got 7,000 people since the sort of partnership with Tesco Bank as well. So, the brand in Scotland is just, so, I would like to see that pushed further. I think if you were a company in the west of Scotland, you probably don't see a lot of, east of Scotland, you probably don't see a lot of Barclays branches. You probably don't know the campus exists. So how do we get that voice of Barclays a little bit louder across Scotland? I think that would be something I'd love to see over the next wee while. I think we've got a great solid base now. Barclays is backing Scotland, but it's now about how do we raise that voice wider across the geography. So that's what I'd love to see from a Barclays perspective. From a personal perspective, just to keep enjoying it, keep having fun, keep enjoying it, keep learning as well. As I say, we've hired a lot of new people into the business over the last 6 months, so I'm enjoying learning from them. AI is coming down the track, and they're pretty good at teaching us how to do things and doing it a lot faster, so I'm always up for that. And then, as you touched on, I want to deliver a great games for Glasgow. So just being involved in that 26 games, and we'll be sweating right up into the last minute, I'm sure. But as soon as that sort of starting gun goes on the athletics or whatever sport's first, I'll be very proud to have been involved in that. So that's probably it from me. Quite a lot to do in a short space of time. Yeah, all the best.
Thanks.
Well, fantastic. Thanks so much for giving your time, coming on the podcast. It's been great to have you on.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Professional Speaks podcast. This podcast was produced by Springwood Studio Productions. Remember, you can watch the episode recording on our YouTube channel, and if you can, please do subscribe and share with all of your friends. The more people who listen to this, the more guests we can have on to share, so that you can learn, be inspired, grow, and ultimately succeed in what you want to achieve in your career. Please also contact me if you have any feedback on this episode. I'd love to hear from you.